The Holy Gospel as it is recorded in Mark. Zebedee's children, James and John, approached Jesus. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to grant our request." "What is it?" Jesus asked. They replied, "See to it that we sit next to you, one on your right and one on your left, when you come into your glory." And Jesus told them, "You do not know what you are asking. Can you drink the cup I will drink, or be baptized in the same baptism as I?" "We can," they replied. Jesus said in response, "From the cup that I drink of, you will drink. The baptism I immersed in, you will share. But as for sitting at my right or my left, that is not mine to give. It is for those to whom it has been reserved." The other 10, on hearing this, became indignant at James and John. Jesus called them together and said, "You know how among the Gentiles those who exercise authority are domineering and arrogant. Those great ones know how to make their own importance felt. But it cannot be like that with you." The Gospel of Christ. So that gospel reading that is prescribed for this morning continues. And some of you may know that these gospel readings follow a 3-year lectionary. And earlier in the week, I received an email from a follower on the blog who said, "Now the gospel has you. Now you will have to confess that Jesus died for your sins." And so here's the part of the reading that continues for today. "Anyone among you who aspires to greatness must serve the rest. Whoever wants to rank first among you must serve the needs of all. The human one has come not to be served, but to serve, to give one life in ransom for the many." The message that I received had that in capital letters, and it was underlined. The human one has come, not to be served, but to serve, to give one life in ransom for the many. They believed that as a progressive preacher, the gospel had captured me, and I would have to confess that Jesus died for my sins. Well, I'll make a confession this morning. In the past, I've always read this story about Jesus with nothing but contempt for the sons of Zebedee. I confess that the characters of James and John have always inspired me to feel more than a little bit smug, and I have always felt justified, indeed, dare I say it, righteous, in treating these two ambitious brothers with more than just a little disdain. In fact, I had a sermon ready to preach that pointed out the ridiculous arrogance of these two wannabes. My sermon was all done and dusted last night when I settled in for a quiet night. And somewhere around 4 this morning, I was awakened by an annoying question that caused me to jump up out of my bed. Let me assure you that I am not a morning person, and I almost never jump out of bed. But this morning, I realized that the sermon I planned to preach needed to be moved to my computer's trash bin. My preoccupation with answering my critic's question had distracted me from the gospel. You see, my cleverly worked out sermon failed to take into consideration New Testament scholar Marcus Borg's insistence that we modern readers of Scripture need to be less concerned with questions about whether or not the stories are true. Of course, the stories in the New Testament are true. The stories in the New Testament may not have happened the way that they are written, but the stories do reveal truth. Borg insists that the question we ought to concern ourselves with is not the question about truth, but the question, why? Why did the author write the story the way the author wrote the story? What truth is the author trying to reveal? So at 4:30 this morning, after a few sips of coffee, listening to the wind howl, it came to me, the truth that the anonymous gospel storyteller revealed in the telling of this story of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, who wanted to sit to the right and to the left of Jesus of Nazareth when he came into glory. It is not a pretty truth. Indeed, it is a rather ugly truth. Where once I was content to ridicule and mock James and John for their arrogant, self-centered demands, now I must see the ugly truth of my own involvement in the anonymous gospel storyteller's attempt to reveal my own arrogance and self-centered nature. The only way I could see the storyteller's revelation was to put away the layers of interpretation that have built up over the centuries since this carefully crafted story was written. The anonymous gospel storyteller that we call Mark wove this tale ever so carefully some 40 to 50 years after the death of Jesus. Scholars insist that this particular gospel storyteller, just like the other three gospel storytellers, was not an eyewitness to the events of Jesus' life. Nevertheless, the truth of these stories continues to reveal the nature of our reality. Writing some 2 generations after the events, our anonymous gospel storyteller is well aware of the effects the truths about the life and death of Jesus of Nazareth are having on the lives of the people who are living in fear under the oppressive regime of the Roman Empire. The way in which Jesus of Nazareth responded to the injustices perpetrated by the domination system upheld by the powers that be was so unusual that our anonymous gospel storyteller was compelled to tell the story of Jesus' way of being, a way of being that rejected violence as a way of achieving justice. Jesus' way of nonviolent resistance pointed to a realm in which peace was achieved through justice for all. At the very heart of this alternative realm, this empire envisioned by Jesus, lay the truth that Jesus lived and died for. Jesus' passionate belief that the mystery that his people called the great I am, Yahweh, the mystery that we and the generations who have gone before us call God, this mystery Jesus passionately believed is love. Jesus lived proclaiming this love as the way, and the powers that be executed Jesus because love is the only thing that really threatens systems of domination, hatred, and greed. So why then did the anonymous gospel storyteller tell the story of the sons of Zebedee the way he told it? Love. The mystery that we call God, this mystery that Jesus of Nazareth knew as Yahweh, this mystery that Jesus insisted is love. Love is precisely why this story is told the way that it is told. Centuries of interpretation may have obscured our view. But if we look closely, we will see that James and John are not just the sons of Zebedee. James and John are you and me. For in the deepest, darkest part of you and of me, there lies a fear. The fear that in the end, the powers of empire will be too much for us to bear. The fear that only power beyond our abilities will defeat the powers of injustice, hatred, and greed, and in the end, our overriding fear of death might just make us willing accomplices to the powers that be. This overriding fear wells up inside you, and it wells up inside of me, so that we, you and me, we go to Jesus and we ask, or we demand, we go to Jesus, you and me, and we beg Jesus to let us be with him in whatever glory lies beyond this life that ends in death. You and me, we ask of Jesus to see to it that we sit next to him on his right and on his left when he comes into his glory, whatever that glory may be. Our gospel storyteller has Jesus respond to you and me, declaring that we don't know what it is we're asking. Have we forgotten where Jesus' way led him? Have we forgotten that just a few lines before, our storyteller had Jesus' own followers sit and listen while he told them that his way means that he must go to Jerusalem, where, among other things, the religious authorities will mock him and spit upon him and flog him and kill him. Some glory. Is this the glory we want a piece of? Have we forgotten that we know what the sons of Zebedee could never have known? That two people will indeed be seated at Jesus' right and left in just a few weeks. Not seated, hanged, crucified with Jesus, one on his right and one on his left. A way of being that will leave Jesus perched between two thieves who will be crucified alongside of him. We ought to be careful what we wish for. Jesus doesn't want the cup that he is to drink, but you and me, we continue to express our desires to be with Jesus, to walk with Jesus, to follow Jesus. Do we really have no idea what it is? Or are we really asking for glory such as Jesus? Sure, Jesus will share a meal, including a cup of blessing with his followers for generations. But there's also that other cup, the one that not even Jesus wanted. The cup that he is offered while he hangs on the instrument of execution, the instrument of the empire of domination, the instrument of hatred, the instrument of greed. That precious cross of the empire. You and me, do we really want to drink from Jesus' cup? You and me, do we really share in Jesus' baptism? Remember the stories that have been handed down to us, warning us of what it means to share in a baptism like his. Remember the stories about Jesus being driven by the spirit of mystery into the wilderness. Do we dare to follow Jesus into the wilderness of unknowing? You and me, we ask to sit, elevated in glory at Jesus' left and right. But have we forgotten that not even his closest friends and followers had what it takes to follow Jesus' way of being? For in the end, Jesus died alone, crying out that even his beloved Abba had forsaken him. And yet, you and me, we continue to ask Jesus to let us be with him in glory, not knowing what this glory is. You and me, We are compelled by our fear, perhaps afraid that we too will die alone, forsaken, even fearing death itself. Please, Jesus, see to it that we sit next to you, one on your right and one on your left, when you come into your glory. The arrogance, the self-centeredness does not belong to James and John alone. The arrogance, the self-centeredness belongs also to you and to me. So let us listen to the way in which our gospel storyteller has Jesus respond, for there is truth in these words. Jesus responds to you and to me the way he responds to the sons of Zebedee. Jesus says, "You know how among the Gentiles those who exercise authority are domineering and arrogant. Those great ones know how to make their own importance felt. But it cannot be like that with you. Anyone among you who aspires to greatness must serve the rest. Whoever wants to rank first among you must serve the needs of all. You and me, we must see our arrogance, our self-centeredness, and our desire to dominate revealed. Our fears, our lack of trust in all that Jesus lived and died to teach about the mystery that lies at the very core of reality, this mystery that Jesus knew as the great I am, this Yahweh, this one we call God, is love. Our lack of trust in this love drives our fear, and we are held captive to the very powers that we long to escape. But fear not. For just as surely as we find ourselves in bondage to our fear, unable to free ourselves, our anonymous gospel storyteller reveals to us the truth expressed in the life and the death of Jesus of Nazareth. He puts these words in Jesus' mouth. For the human one has come not to be served, but to serve, to give one life in ransom for many. There's that word, ransom. We hear the word ransom, and our minds go racing forward beyond our storyteller's revelation to centuries of layer upon layer of interpretation that portrays this ransom in ever-increasing perverse ways that defy the truth of the very reality that Jesus lived and died to proclaim, the truth that the mystery we long to know is love. Remember, the anonymous gospel storyteller that we call Mark had no idea that Jesus' life and death would be portrayed by the powers that be as a ransom to be paid to the very mystery that Jesus insists is love. Christianity's utterly loveless atonement theories about substitution and payment, arguing down through the centuries about whether this ransom is paid to God or to the devil, insult the very memory of the rabbi himself, whose death saves us not from the wrath of God, but rather saves us from ourselves. Jesus lived and died, giving his life to ransom us from ourselves, from our fear, so that free from the captivity in which our fear has confined us, we might walk freely away from our own self-centeredness. Jesus poured out his life in the service of love, as the embodiment of love. Jesus will never die. And Jesus rises again and again and again wherever love is embodied. And so Jesus never dies. The love expressed in the life and in the death of Jesus lives on in you and in me, rises again in the love that we embody. Not even our fear, expressed in domination, in greed, in hatred, and in violence, not even our fear of death, expressed in war and violence, can kill the love that lies at the very heart of all that is, and rises again and again, wherever and whenever arrogance is ransomed by humility, fear is ransomed by courage, hatred is ransomed by kindness, violence is ransomed by justice, war is ransomed by peace, and self-centeredness is ransomed by service to others. This, dear sisters and brothers, is what it means for you and for me to sit at Jesus' side, to be ransomed from our very selves, ransomed from the fear that holds us captive. We are ransomed from our fear, from our arrogance and our self-centeredness, set free from fear, set free to trust the mystery that is love, so that we might live the way of love, so that we might be love in the world. Let it be so among us. Let it be so. Amen.